Hello, my friend. Welcome to Dreamy Nights Classics. Tonight, we open the pages of a timeless tale, one that has drifted through centuries of whispered wonder, to find you here beneath the hush of evening. It is a story of mirrors and stillness, of purity and renewal, retold in the soft light of understanding, where even silence carries meaning, and every reflection reveals more than it seems. So settle in and let this old story become a new dream. When you're ready, our story begins. Before we begin tonight's story, if these quiet moments bring you peace, you might gently subscribe so that you may always return to this tranquil space when rest calls your name. Your presence here means more than you know. Now let us begin. In a castle wrapped in twilight, mirrors gleamed like sleeping water. Their silvered faces caught the slow flicker of candlelight, casting soft halos across marble floors. Beyond the tall windows, the world lay hushed, the snow still falling, the air tender with winter's breath. And in the heart of that stillness stood a young woman whose skin seemed carved from the pale moonlight itself. Her name was Snow White, a name not given for beauty alone, but for something deeper. The quiet purity of new snow, untouched by footsteps. The way morning light folds gently over silence. She stood before the mirror in her chamber, not in vanity, but in quiet wonder. The glass shimmered faintly, holding both her image and the golden candle flame beside her, two forms of light meeting in reflection. She lifted her hand, tracing a slow circle on the cold surface. The glass felt alive, breathing faintly beneath her fingertips. Sometimes she thought of mirrors not as things that show, but as things that listen, capturing every sigh, every unspoken question that lives between moments. The mirror gave nothing back but stillness. And yet in that stillness, she found peace. It did not praise. It did not compare. It simply was. Like the moon above the snow, it watched quietly and reflected all without judgment. From the hallway came the faint rustle of silk, her stepmother, the queen, moving through the castle's echoing halls. Where Snow White's mirror shimmered softly, the queen's mirrors gleamed in grand chambers, many of them tall and cold-polished until they blazed with reflected firelight. To her, the mirror was an oracle, a witness to her longing for perfection. But to Snow White, it was only a companion of calm, a place where light and breath could rest. The queen passed by, her perfume trailing like the fading note of a song. She neither spoke nor paused. Only the sound of her heels echoed and vanished, leaving behind a faint chill in the corridor. Snow White did not follow her gaze to the mirror again. Instead, she turned toward the window where frost had gathered on the glass in feathery veins. Outside, the forest stretched beneath the night like an endless sea of whispering branches. The moon, pale and patient, lingered above it all, as though keeping watch over every heart that dreamed below. Snow White pressed her palm to the cold window pane, feeling the world breathe through it. She thought of the still lake beyond the trees, the way it mirrored the sky not to imitate, but to join it. Every reflection, she realized, is simply light returning home. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the scent of candle wax and winter air. The silence was not empty. It was full of soft memory, full of waiting. In that silence, she could almost hear the pulse of her own being, steady and kind. The candle beside her guttered once, and the flame steadied. A single petal from the rose in the vase near her bed drifted to the floor. Everything moved slowly, even time as if reluctant to disturb the peace. And somewhere far beyond the walls, the forest exhaled a deep, quiet breath, as though inviting her nearer. Snow White whispered softly to the mirror, her voice barely more than a thought. I wish to see what lies beyond, what eyes can see. The mirror, of course, said nothing, but within its depths, her reflection flickered, and for just a moment, it seemed as though the moonlight inside her eyes looked back at her with knowing calm. The night deepened. Shadows lengthened across the floor, and the mirror dimmed to silver mist. Snow White set down her candle and let the quiet embrace her completely. In that stillness, she felt the first stirring of something wordless, the beginning of a journey not outward but inward into the tranquil forest of the self. And as the last light flickered out, the room became a sanctuary of hush, the world holding its breath before the dream unfolded. Other night drifted gently onward, wrapping the castle in a deeper shade of blue. Where Snow White's chamber had fallen into quiet sleep, another part of the palace still glowed with wakeful light. At the far end of a long marble corridor, a tall door stood half open. From within, a warm amber radiance spilled across the floor like liquid firelight. Inside that room, the air shimmered with a different kind of stillness. Not the resting stillness of snow and moon, but the held breath of longing. This was the Queen's Hall of Mirrors. Dozens of tall, silvery panels lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Their frames were carved from dark wood and gilded with fine gold leaf shaped into curling vines and delicate crowns. Candle flames were stationed everywhere in clusters upon polished tables, upon ornate wall brackets, and in iron lanterns that hung from the ceiling like dimly glowing fruit. The mirrors caught each flame and multiplied it until the entire room seemed to be made of flickering light layered upon itself. The Queen stood near the center, her figure wrapped in deep velvet, the color of midnight wine. She moved slowly, as if wading through still water, her hands resting lightly on the smooth curve of a hand-carved chair. The scent of jasmine incense curled softly through the air, mixing with the faint perfume of beeswax and ash from the candles. Every time she shifted, the mirrors echoed her movement, reflecting her in 1,000 tiny variations, each angle catching a new glint of light, a new shadow upon her face. Yet the room, despite all its brightness, felt strangely quiet. The only sounds were the gentle crackle of candle wicks and the distant ticking of a clock somewhere deep in the castle. She lifted one hand and traced an idle pattern on the surface of the nearest mirror. Watching the pale line left by her fingertip fade slowly back into clear glass. The mirror was cool beneath her touch, unwavering. It did not lean closer or pull away. It simply received her, holding her image as calmly as a frozen lake holds the reflection of the sky. In that clear, undisturbed surface, the queen saw her own face, the measured poise of her features, the smooth fall of her dark hair, the steady gaze she had practiced for many years. Behind her, reflected again and again, the hall stretched into a gleaming corridor of light and repetition, each version of her standing in perfect symmetry. She stepped aside, and another mirror greeted her with the same patient quiet. There were evenings when she walked this hall in silence, pausing before each panel as though each one were a separate world. Her fingertips brushed along the gilt edges, feeling the ridges of carved leaves and fruit, the slight roughness where the gold had worn over time. The room seemed to breathe with her, expanding with each inhale, settling with each exhale. Snow White's chamber further down the corridor had long since gone dark. There, the mirror had slipped into a soft silver sleep, holding nothing but the faint suggestion of the moon's glow. Here in the Queen's Hall, light refused to rest. It shimmered, it repeated it, ricocheted gently from one surface to the next. Every candle flame had a twin and a twin's twin. Every shadow belonged to 100 other shadows, all quietly watching each other. The queen moved to a small table where a folded cloth lay beside a crystal bottle of oil. She picked up the cloth in both hands and poured a single drop of the oil into its center. The scent of the oil rose slowly, a deeper, resinous fragrance, warm and slightly sweet, like polished wood and faint citrus. She chose one mirror and began to wipe slow circular motions, tracing patterns of care. With each pass of the cloth, smudges faded, little fingerprints dissolved, and the surface regained its perfect clarity. The ritual was unhurried, almost tender, a meticulous process of bringing the glass back to its brightest reflections. As she worked her way from one mirror to the next, the room shifted around her. In one panel, her profile appeared against the gold of the walls. In another, she was seen from behind her figure, framed by an endless corridor of her own images, stretching into a hazy distance. The light softened at the edges of these reflections, melting into a blur that looked almost like mist. Even in the stillness, there was a sense that the mirrors were listening, not in judgment, not in praise, but in a kind of quiet, attentive presence. They received everything without resistance. The light, the shadow, the tiredness at the corners of her eyes, the steady composure of her posture. When she paused, she rested her palm flat against one of the panels, feeling the faint coolness seep into her skin. Her breath fogged the surface just a little, leaving a soft bloom of mist that slowly disappeared. The mirror returned to its calm. Elsewhere in the castle, the night was thick with winter silence. Snow continued to fall in soft, drifting strands, settling along parapets, window ledges, and stone steps. In the courtyard, a fountain sat still, its waters partially frozen, catching fragments of starlight in its icy surface. Inside the hall, the queen's gaze moved from one reflection to another. In some, a candle behind her shoulder looked like a small sun. In others, the angle of her head made her expression seem more thoughtful, more distant, more pensive. The mirrors did not decide which one was true. They simply offered her all of them one by one, like pages in a book she alone could read. Near the far wall, a particularly tall mirror rose from the floor like a column of liquid silver. At its base, a low cushioned seat waited. The queen sank onto it slowly, the fabric sighing beneath her weight. She folded her hands in her lap and let her eyes soften, no longer searching for any one reflection in particular. In the fibers of the room, in the weave of velvet, in the polished grain of the wooden frames, in the flickering dance of the flames, the castle's long memory lingered. It remembered laughter in summers, long past the sound of footsteps. Lighter than these, the gentle tread of a king whose presence had once filled these halls with warmth. Now the warmth came mostly from the candles, their flames swaying in silence, content to burn out slowly in their own time. The queen's head tilted slightly, as though listening for something far away. But the only reply came from the soft crackle of wicks and the occasional settling whisper of the building itself. Beams relaxing, stone cooling air, moving in unseen currents. On a small side table, a silver hand mirror rested atop a folded cloth. Its handle was shaped like an unfurling flower petals curling inward. She reached for it almost absent-mindedly, fingers closing around the cool metal. Lifting it into the candlelight, she regarded the image within a smaller, more intimate reflection than those along the walls. This mirror showed only her face, framed by the faint glow of the room behind. The curve of her brow, the quiet line of her mouth, the thoughtful depth in her eyes. For a moment, her gaze drifted beyond the surface, unfocused, as if searching for something not entirely visible. The mirror remained steady, its silver heart faithfully reflecting whatever it was given. In another wing of the castle, in a room where the candle had gone out, Snow White slept. Her breath rose and fell in gentle waves beneath a quilted blanket. By her bedside, the rose in the vase had shed another petal, now resting on the wooden table like a small red echo. If the mirrors in the Queen's Hall had been able to show more than appearances, they might have revealed this quiet harmony, the connection between these two lives unfolding under the same roof, the same moon, the same winter sky. But they held only one task: to reflect what stood before them. Everything deeper remained folded softly beneath the surface, waiting for gentler light. The Queen placed the hand mirror back upon the table, aligning it carefully with the edge of the folded cloth. Her fingers lingered on the smooth metal for a moment, feeling its weight, its chill. Then she rose her gown, whispering over the floor as she moved. She walked once more through the hall, passing each mirror in turn. Her reflection glided alongside her, stretching and shrinking, with the curves of the glass multiplying and dissolving as she went. At the doorway, she paused and looked back. The room behind her glowed softly, every flame nestled within its own glass echo. It looked less like a place of scrutiny now and more like a sanctuary of light, a chamber where brightness and shadow lived together without dispute. With a gentle motion, she closed the door until only a sliver of golden light remained. Then that too slipped away, leaving the corridor wrapped in cooler tones of blue and silver. The castle exhaled as though relieved to rest. In the high windows overlooking the forest, moonlight spread itself like a calm blanket, touching stone and wood alike. In one window, faint and distant, a single pane caught the Queen's reflection. As she walked away, a small, softened silhouette drifting through the quiet. The mirrors in her hall settled into silence, their surfaces now holding nothing but the memory of moving light. They rested as lakes rest after wind, smooth and undisturbed, waiting for dawn. And deep within the castle, two lives, one wrapped in velvet and candlelight, the other in linen, and dreams turned gently in the same night, each surrounded by their own kind of reflection. Morning came in silence. It arrived not as an awakening, but as a soft turning of the world toward light. The snow outside the castle shimmered like crushed glass, catching faint hues of rose and pale gold. No trumpets, no footsteps, no voices. Only the gentle sigh of wind drifting through half-opened shutters. Snow White stood by the window again. The frost that had laced the glass overnight began to melt, forming small beads of water that slid slowly downward. leaving clear paths through the misted pane. Beyond the forest waited a vast cathedral of trees, their trunks dark with moisture, their branches jeweled with snow. The quiet felt alive. She dressed simply, drawing a cloak of soft wool around her shoulders, its color the faint blue of early dawn. Her fingers lingered on the clasp, tracing its smooth edge, before she drew the hood lightly over her hair. In her chamber, the candle had burned to its base. A faint wisp of smoke curled from its wick, carrying the scent of beeswax and something bittersweet, like the memory of dreams. She glanced once more at her mirror. It had lost its brilliance, now dimmed to a surface of pale fog. Yet in that dimness, she found comfort. Reflections, she thought, are not meant to be stared into forever. Sometimes they are doorways to step through. So she opened the door and stepped softly into the hall. The air was cooler here, touched with stone and silence. Her footsteps made little sound upon the marble, each step a whisper, each breath a prayer to the quiet. When she reached the great doors of the castle, the guards were absent, the courtyard empty. The morning had hidden everyone away, as if the world itself had chosen stillness over speech. She pressed her hand to the iron handle and pulled. The heavy doors opened with a long, low sigh, like the world exhaling. Outside, the forest called to her in hushes and glimmers. The snow, still fresh from the night, bore no tracks. It spread across the ground in smooth, unbroken waves, glowing faintly under the shy light of dawn. Every branch carried a burden of crystal flakes that sparkled and then vanished as the sun tried gently to wake. She began to walk. The sound beneath her boots was soft, the snow giving way with quiet patience. Each step released a tiny muffled sigh, not unlike the sound of turning a page in an old beloved book. The path wound downward from the castle walls, curving toward the tree line. A single bird called once, then fell silent again. Its voice echoed briefly, fading into the hush of the woods. As she entered the forest, the air changed. It became thicker, more fragrant resin and pine bark and damp moss. Here the sound of the world softened into layers. The drip of melting snow from high branches, the faint creak of a tree adjusting to the weight of morning, the slow hush of her own breath. The light was different too, filtered, softened, moving in long shafts through the mist. It painted the ground in shifting pools of silver and pearl. Everywhere she looked, reflections bloomed. Light mirrored on icicles, shadows mirrored on still ponds, hidden among the roots. Even the smallest droplet clinging to a twig held a world inside it. She paused beside one such droplet, leaning closer. Within its curved surface, She saw a tiny inverted forest sky below earth, above trees, suspended like dream fragments. When it fell, its impact was soundless, absorbed by the snow. She smiled faintly, feeling something inside her loosen. A small clearing opened ahead, a circle of bare ground, ringed by cedar and oak. At its center stood a fallen branch, half buried beneath the snow, yet glowing faintly with the light caught in its ice-slick bark. She knelt beside it, brushing away a thin layer of frost with her glove. The texture beneath was smooth, cool, slightly rough at the edges where it had cracked. Everything about it felt alive, even in stillness. Snow White closed her eyes for a moment and listened. The forest spoke in quiet rhythms, the kind one feels rather than hears. It was not speech, but a kind of understanding, a slow and steady pulse that seemed to echo her own heartbeat. Here there was no comparison, no measure of worth. There was only the soft breathing of earth and air, and her small presence within it. A breeze stirred, carrying with it a scent of cedar and something faintly sweet, like wild honey hidden somewhere deep among the trees. Her hood fluttered back slightly, releasing a few strands of her dark hair. They caught the light gleaming with a sheen like melted snow. She stood again and continued walking deeper into the forest. The path was no longer clear, yet she did not feel lost. Wherever she looked, the trees seemed to part just enough for her to pass. They did not hinder or hide. They welcomed, as though recognizing one who carried quiet within her. Far above the canopy, opened to a pale strip of sky. A single ray of sunlight filtered through, touching her face with gentle warmth. It felt almost like a hand laid upon her in blessing. For the first time that morning, she took a long, full breath. It filled her lungs with air so clean and cold that it shimmered inside her chest. Somewhere ahead, water moved faint, steady. She followed the sound until she reached a small stream, its surface half frozen, the current flowing beneath like liquid glass. Kneeling beside it, she dipped her hand into the water. The chill was sharp, but pure, cutting through every remaining trace of thought. Ripples spread outward, touching sunlight and shadow alike. The forest watched. Its branches leaned inward, as if in gentle curiosity, and the air seemed to pause around her. When she lifted her hand again, droplets ran along her wrist, leaving cold trails that warmed almost instantly against her skin. Each drop caught light, tiny mirrors of the world around them. For a long while, she remained there, sitting beside the stream, listening to the mingling of sound and silence. Her eyes following the flow of water, disappearing into deeper woods. Soon, in the distance, faintly, she could hear the castle bell mark the turning of the hour. But its voice reached her as nothing more than an echo, softened by distance and snow. Here, time did not divide itself into hours. It unfolded like breath slow, continuous, circular. The forest did not ask where she had come from or where she was going. It simply held her as the earth holds roots, as the sky holds light. She understood in that moment that this place was not away from the world, but inside it, the living reflection beneath its surface. Snow White rose once more, her cloak brushing lightly against the low branches. She turned slowly, her gaze passing over trees and light and mist. There was no fear in her movement, no need to hurry. The air was her companion, the forest her mirror. And as she walked onward, her footsteps softened further, blending with the breath of the woods until they could no longer be told apart. The day grew softer as it deepened. Sunlight wandered through the forest in slow, drifting patches. Golden one moment, silver the next, as clouds passed lazily across the sky. Snow White followed no marked path, yet her steps seemed gently guided by unseen hands of wind and whisper. She moved through veils of light that trembled across the moss, each one like the breath of an unseen dream. The trees began to thin. Their tall silhouettes gave way to open space, and the forest revealed a small clearing ahead, so quiet that even the air seemed to rest there. In its heart stood a cottage. It was simple, small, and built of weathered wood that glowed honey gold under the late afternoon light. Smoke rose from a short chimney, thin and slow, like a thought climbing toward the sky. The windows shone with a mild amber warmth, and a single lantern hung by the door, its glass slightly clouded with age. Around it grew herbs and small winter blossoms, thyme, snowdrops and dried lavender, tied into little bundles beneath the window frames. Snow White paused at the edge of the clearing, listening. The sound of the forest here was different, not the wild hush of open woods, but a tender, settled quiet. Somewhere nearby, water boiled faintly. The scent of baked bread mingled with that of cedar and warm stone. It felt like the kind of place the world had forgotten to rush. She stepped closer, her boots leaving shallow prints in the soft snow. When she reached the door, she hesitated, her hand hovering just above the latch. A faint hum drifted from within. Not a song, but the kind of low, rhythmic sound that fills a space with calm like wind through a hollow reed. Gathering her breath, she knocked once lightly. The sound barely broke the air. For a moment, nothing stirred. Then came the soft creak of footsteps, slow and deliberate, as though the house itself were waking. The latch lifted, and the door opened inward. Warmth poured out. The air smelled of baked apples and wool of pine wood fire and candle smoke. Inside stood 7 figures, small and round in outline, yet each distinct, not in shape, but in presence. Their faces carried the gentle lines of age, though none seemed old. Their eyes were calm, and when they looked upon her, there was no surprise, no fear, only recognition, as if they had been expecting her for a long time. Snow White lowered her hood. The air touched her hair, damp with melted snow, and it shone faintly in the golden light. "I did not mean to intrude," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. One of them, whose eyes glimmered with quiet kindness, smiled. "There are no intrusions here," he said. "This is a house for those who walk softly." They stepped aside and she entered. The room was small, but full of warmth. A fire burned low in a stone hearth, its flames swaying gently like petals caught in a slow breeze. On the table rested a loaf of bread, still warm from the oven, beside a clay bowl filled with wild berries preserved in honey. Dried herbs hung from the beams, their scent mild and comforting. Every object seemed to have been placed with care. Nothing wasted, nothing loud. One by one, the 7 introduced themselves, though not with names, but with words that carried feeling. "I am kindness," said the first, with eyes like the surface of a calm lake. "I am patience," murmured the second, his voice smooth as worn stone. "I am humility," said another, bowing slightly, as though to the air itself. The others followed: wonder, gratitude, truth, and peace. Their voices blended like chords in a single song, simple yet harmonious. Snow White listened, her heart settling into their rhythm. Each one moved slowly, without haste or clamor. Their every gesture, pouring tea, folding cloth, tending the fire, seemed part of an ancient, unspoken ritual of gentleness. Patience offered her a chair near the fire. It was carved from birch, its surface soft and smooth from years of touch. She sat, feeling the warmth seep through her cloak. Truth poured her a cup of warm milk, adding a few drops of golden honey. The taste was pure, almost glowing. They asked her no questions about where she had come from or why she was alone. Their silence was not ignorance, it was acceptance. And so she spoke only when the quiet itself invited her to. "I wandered from the castle," she said. "I felt called to the forest, to something beyond the mirrors." Gratitude nodded, his expression serene. "The forest keeps what it needs," he said. "It does not demand, it welcomes. Those who come seeking peace find what they already carry." Wonder added softly, "We keep this cottage for that reason. Each who stays here remembers something they had forgotten and leaves behind something they no longer need." Their words felt like soft snowfall on the heart, each one dissolving into stillness, as it landed. Snow White looked around the room again. She noticed now how everything mirrored everything else in miniature. The firelight mirrored in the teapot mirrored in the window mirrored in the eyes of those around her. It was as though the house itself breathed reflection. Peace rose and opened a small wooden chest near the hearth. Inside lay 7 candles, each a different shade: cream, amber, pale blue, green, rose gold, and silver. He lit one and placed it upon the mantle where its flame joined the quiet chorus of light. "This one," he said, "is for renewal." The flame flickered once, then steadied, burning with soft steadiness, neither bright nor dim. Snow White watched it closely. The longer she gazed, the more it seemed alive, as if its quiet endurance held a message deeper than words. She felt her body loosen, her breath slow. In the gentle company of these beings, she sensed no need to prove or perform. Here, beauty was not something to display. It was something that existed naturally, like warmth from a fire. They shared a simple meal, bread, berries, and tea steeped with herbs. No one hurried, and no sound rose above the low hum of the flames. When night drew in, Patience offered her a small bed covered in soft linen. "Rest," he said. "In this house, dreams are mirrors too." She smiled faintly and lay down. The linen smelled of sunlight and pine. Her head sank into the pillow, and the sounds of the cottage, the fire, the slow breath of those at peace wrapped around her like a lullaby. Outside, the forest leaned closer, its branches brushing the roof in gentle rhythm. Snow drifted quietly through the moonlight, collecting on the window ledge in fragile crescents. From where she lay, she could see the silver candle still burning its flame, unwavering, its light reflecting softly in the window pane beside her bed. And in that mirrored flame, the world seemed whole. Every shadow had its light, every breath its echo. The night at last was kind. The cottage slept. Only the slow, rhythmic breathing of the forest surrounded it. The creak of snow settling upon the roof, the faint murmur of wind brushing past wooden beams, the heartbeat of quiet things at rest. Inside, the last embers of the fire glowed like the eyes of gentle stars. Their warmth pulsed faintly across the room, lighting the low rafters and the soft edges of chairs and cups. Snow White stirred beneath her blanket. Dreams drifted through her like light through water scenes, half-remembered faces, half felt. She saw the castle's long halls, but softened now, empty of echo. The mirrors no longer glared. They shimmered like moonlit pools, quiet and kind. When she woke, the world was still suspended between night and dawn. She rose slowly, wrapping her cloak around her shoulders. The air was cool, carrying the faint sweetness of burned wood and lavender. Near the hearth, Peace slept in a chair, his head resting against the wall. The other 6 rested nearby, still serene, their faces calm in sleep. Their presence filled the cottage with a sense of harmony, as though each breath they took tuned the silence to a perfect note. Snow White moved quietly, so as not to disturb them. She crossed to the table where a single candle still burned beside a small hand mirror, its handle carved of dark walnut, its surface dulled slightly with age. It had not been there before. Perhaps one of them had placed it while she slept, or perhaps it had been there all along, waiting to be seen. She drew the candle closer. Its flames swayed gently, painting the mirror's frame in strokes of gold and shadow. Then, taking a seat, she lifted the mirror and held it before her. At first, she saw only her reflection, blurred slightly by the tremor of the flame. Her eyes clear and dark, her skin touched with the faint warmth of sleep. But as she watched, the surface of the mirror began to shift. Light deepened, colors softened. The reflection seemed to breathe. She leaned closer, her breath misting faintly across the glass. Within the blur, images began to rise, not of the outer world, but of the quiet world within. She saw the forest calm mirrored in her own stillness. The candle's unwavering glow reflected in her quiet courage. And beyond that, she saw the shadows too. The moments of doubt, the lingering ache of being unseen. All of it was there, woven together like strands of the same thread. For a moment, she hesitated. It would have been easy to look away, but she stayed. And in staying, the mirror grew calm again. The shadows no longer hid. They simply rested beside the light, neither greater nor lesser. Snow White understood then that purity was not the absence of darkness. It was the gentleness that allowed both to exist without judgment. A balance like day and night, sharing the same horizon. Her fingertips brushed the mirror's surface. It felt cool, smooth, alive. The candle beside her flickered, and for a breath's span, her reflection dissolved entirely into light. She thought of her stepmother, of the long hall, filled with mirrors that only reflected longing. She thought of herself, once seen, once compared, now free from such seeing. In the still air of the cottage, she whispered not words, but forgiveness. It drifted like smoke, weightless, unseen, but deeply felt. From the other room came the soft rustle of someone waking. Kindness stirred his footsteps, slow and deliberate. He approached the table and paused beside her. The candle's glow touched both their faces. He did not ask what she had seen. He only said in a voice like water over stones, "Every mirror waits for truth, but truth only appears when we stop searching for beauty. She looked up at him, her eyes still shimmering from what she'd seen reflected his calm gaze. I saw everything she said, and everything was gentle. He smiled, nodding. Then you saw rightly. They sat together for a while, saying nothing. Outside, the forest began to wake birds, calling softly from hidden branches, snow sliding from leaves with the muffled sighs. The first strands of morning light reached through the small window, touching the table and the mirror's edge. The others began to stir too. Peace stretching slowly. Gratitude adding another log to the fire. Wonder humming a quiet tune as he swept a bit of snow from the doorstep. The rhythm of the cottage returned simple and steady. It was a rhythm older than speech, one that needed no measure of time. When the tea was ready, they shared it in silence. Each cup steamed gently, fragrant with wild mint and clover. The warmth spread through her palms, the scent through her thoughts. Everything, the fire, the breath of the forest beyond the walls, the heartbeat within her chest seemed to move together as one. Later, when she stepped outside, the light had changed. The snow no longer gleamed white, but a faint gold, as if touched by memory itself. She carried the mirror with her, wrapped in cloth, holding it not as a treasure, but as a companion. In its surface, she could now see not only her face, but the living world around her. The way the trees bowed slightly toward her, the way light and shadow played tenderly on the snow. Every reflection was whole, every glimmer true. She paused, breathing deeply of the cold, clear air. Her breath mingled with the rising mist, and for a brief, eternal moment, she felt herself dissolve into the same quiet the forest had taught her. Not as an ending, but as a joining. The cottage door closed softly behind her, sealing its warmth inside, carrying her peace outward into the day. Ahead, the forest waited calm, luminous, aware. And as she walked toward it, her reflection shimmered across every frozen pool she passed, not reminding her who she was, but reflecting what she had become. Winter deepened. The forest, once murmuring with soft streams and whispering leaves, now spoke in the language of silence. The air had thickened with frost, not harsh, but tender, as though the world had chosen to pause and breathe. Each branch, each stone, each drift of snow seemed to hold its own quiet dream. Snow White had grown to love the still rhythm of her days. Each morning, she rose with the light tending the small hearth, while the others began their unhurried routines. They worked not to chase time, but to keep it soft sweeping, cooking, gathering, speaking little. Every movement was gentle, every sound respectful of the silence that held them. When she stepped outside, the snow greeted her like an old friend. It crunched faintly beneath her boots, releasing that familiar, crystalline sigh. The trees bowed under the weight of their icy crowns, glittering with morning light. The sky itself seemed to rest pale and untroubled, its vastness folded into the hush of the earth below. There was peace in repetition, in the way the days mirrored each other, each one slightly altered, yet always familiar. The same fire, the same cup of tea, the same path through the woods. But within these quiet samenesses, she felt something changing, a still blossoming inside her, like the slow unfurling of a bud beneath snow. One evening, when dusk had already settled like lavender mist across the clearing, Snow White sat near the hearth. The 7 gentle souls had drifted into their own reflections. Kindness, knitting, peace, tending the fire, gratitude, mending a small wooden bowl. The air shimmered with the soft warmth of shared silence. A light snow began to fall outside its flakes, brushing the window like whispered lullabies. She rose, drawn to it, and placed her palm against the glass. It was cool, smooth, a mirror made by nature itself. Her reflection shimmered faintly beside the snowflakes. Behind her, the fire glowed like a small sun, caught in still water. She turned to the 7 and asked quietly, "Does the forest ever sleep?" Patience smiled, setting aside his knitting. "The forest sleeps and wakes all at once," he said. "Sleep in nature is not forgetting. It is remembering what truly rests. The trees sleep, so the roots can listen." His words lingered in the air like warm breath. Snow White returned to her chair and watched the fire burn, lower its flames, folding inward. The scent of pine and wood smoke wrapped around her like a soft shawl. Her eyelids grew heavy, not from fatigue, but from the natural pull of the world toward rest. The others sensed it too. Without a word, they rose, and each lit a candle, placing it near the window. 7 small flames, steady and pale, watching over the night. Then one by one, they drifted into their rooms, leaving her alone with the glow of their quiet vigil. She sat in the dim room, the only sounds the occasional pop of the fire and the sigh of wind beneath the door. The mirror from the morning rested beside her on the table. She lifted it once more, but this time the surface reflected not her face, only light. The flame of the candle shimmered at its center like a tiny sun. She watched it until the edges blurred, until her thoughts softened into rhythm with the breath of the flame. When she finally lay down, she did not fall into sleep so much as into stillness. A sleep that was not forgetting, but renewal. Her breath slowed her body heavy yet light. The forest breathed with her. Snow fell more thickly now, covering the roof in soft, deep layers. It pressed gently against the windows, dimming the candlelight to a golden haze. In her rest, she dreamed not of events, but of feelings. The quiet hands of kindness, the endless patience of the trees, the mirror's calm reflection of all that simply is. Each feeling drifted across her mind like slow snowflakes, unique, weightless, perfect. Outside, dawns came and went. The sun rose and fell unseen behind veils of cloud. Birds vanished to warmer skies. The stream beneath the hills slowed into glass. But inside the cottage, warmth never left. The fire burned steady, watched over by those who understood the rhythm of stillness. Weeks passed, or perhaps only moments. Time here no longer moved in lines. It circled softly like the swirl of snow in the wind. Snow White's rest became part of the forest's own slumber. Her breath matched the rhythm of falling flakes, the slow inhale and exhale of the earth beneath. There was no fear in her sleep, no darkness, no dream that asked to be solved. Only peace, pure, translucent, eternal. On one quiet morning, when winter began to turn ever so slightly towards spring, the forest stirred. A faint sound of dripping snow, melting from branches, echoed through the clearing. Light crept back, timid and golden, touching the roof, the windows. And finally, the edge of her bed. The warmth reached her hand first, then her cheek. Her eyes fluttered open, not startled, but as though waking from the gentlest dream. The world outside shimmered in silver thaw, alive again, but still hushed. She sat up slowly, the blanket slipping down her shoulders. Her body felt rested in a way that words could not describe, as though sleep had rebuilt her from light itself. The mirror lay on the table nearby, its surface clear once more. And within it, the sunlight danced, not showing her image, but reflecting the living world that awaited her. The forest had not changed, and yet everything within her had. She realized then that rest is not escape, it is the soul's way of remembering itself. She rose, opened the window, and let the cool morning air flow in. It touched her face gently, carrying with it the faint scent of earth waking under snow. The silence she had found within her sleep did not vanish. It moved with her, breathing through her as naturally as the wind through the trees. In the forest, beyond, a bird began to sing a low, trembling note that carried through the air like the first word, spoken after a vow of silence. It was enough. The world had woken again softly. The world had turned again. What once lay veiled beneath snow now shimmered with the quiet pulse of returning life. Ice melted along the edges of the stream, revealing glimpses of clear, moving water beneath. Branches stretched, releasing their weight. The air, once crisp and crystalline, had begun to soften, scented faintly with earth and thaw. Snow White stood by the window, her hands resting lightly on the wooden sill. The glass was still clouded with frost at its corners, but where sunlight touched it, cleared, revealing the slow dance of light across the trees outside. The morning was pale and tender as if newly made. And in that hush between winter and spring, she felt the gentle stirring of something like rebirth. Inside the cottage, all was calm. The 7 gentle souls moved about with their usual grace, slow, steady, purposeful. Gratitude polished the wooden table until it gleamed faintly in the growing light. Patience folded woolen blankets and stacked them neatly by the hearth. Truth poured warm tea into small clay cups, the rising steam catching a golden shimmer in the air. Snow White joined them, her steps quiet, her expressions soft with thought. Peace looked up from the fire and smiled. The forest breathes differently today, he said, his voice low and mellow. It's waking. She nodded. Yes, she replied. But it feels gentle, as if it remembers to move slowly. Kindness handed her a cup of tea. It does, he said. Everything that sleeps deeply must wake tenderly. She accepted the cup, its warmth soaking into her palms. Outside, a bird trilled. Once, then fell silent. A single bright note held within the larger stillness. The fire popped softly, and for a long moment, no one spoke. The quiet itself was conversation enough. Later that morning, Snow White stepped outside. The snow in the clearing had thinned, revealing patches of damp moss and brown leaves glistening with dew. The cottage's smoke drifted upward into the pale sky, fading into the brightness above. She wrapped her cloak close, though the air was mild now, that delicate in-between season where cold and warmth hold hands. The forest awaited her. It had changed subtly overnight. Icicles still clung to the lower branches, but they sparkled now not with the stillness of ice, but with the movement of melting. Tiny drops fell one by one, each catching a fragment of sunlight before disappearing into the earth. She walked slowly along the familiar path, her boots pressing soft impressions into the slush. The air carried new scents, the faint sweetness of sap, the green whisper of life beneath the thaw. Everywhere she looked, reflections lingered. Sunlight mirrored in melting ice, skimmered in puddles. Her own outline mirrored faintly in the sheen of water upon bark. It was as though the world, newly awake, was rediscovering its own image. At the bend of the path, she came to the small stream once more, where once it had flowed beneath glassy ice. It now moved freely, carrying tiny petals of snow like boats drifting toward nowhere. She knelt beside it, touching the water. It was still cold, but alive with motion, an unbroken thread weaving through the forest's slow awakening. As she watched it flow, she remembered her dream. The dream she had not truly dreamed, but lived. The long sleep of winter. The quiet mirrors, the unspoken forgiveness. Everything she had learned now shimmered before her clear and simple. She saw that the world itself was a mirror reflecting endlessly between silence and sound, between rest and renewal. And within that reflection, she found herself not as she once was, but as she had always quietly been. The forest light shifted, spreading across her hands. In it, her skin glowed with a faint warmth. She smiled, not a smile of triumph or joy, but of recognition. For the first time, she saw no distance between herself and the light around her. The same calm that rested in the forest had taken root in her heart. She rose, brushing snow from her knees, and turned her gaze upward. The sky had cleared completely now, a delicate blue washed clean by morning. The sun stood low, its rays streaming through the thinning branches like threads of spun gold. Each beam moved gently through the air, illuminating particles of frost that shimmered and disappeared like thoughts released into peace. In that golden quiet, Snow White understood that awakening is never loud. It arrives the way dawn does, through layers of gentleness, through patient light. And that the truest awakening is not the opening of eyes, but the quiet remembering of what they already see. She lingered there for a while, breathing, watching the world move with her. The stream murmured softly. The wind shifted through the trees. The earth itself seemed to exhale. When she finally turned back toward the cottage, the sound of melting snow followed her, 1,000 tiny droplets, falling like the ticking of some natural clock, not counting time, but celebrating it. The door opened before she reached it. Wonder stood there, framed by the warmth inside. "The morning feels new," he said. "It is," she answered, "but so are we." He stepped aside, and she entered once more into the golden hush of the cottage. The 7 candles on the mantel burned low but steady, their small flames bowing slightly toward her, as if in greeting. She set the mirror, her faithful companion, upon the table, its surface catching the mingled light of fire and sun. For the first time, she noticed it no longer reflected only her. Within its glass shimmered everything: the forest, the window, the fire, the faces of her gentle friends, all woven together, inseparable. Snow White looked upon it and felt no boundary between reflection and reality. It was all one breath, one stillness. Outside, the day unfolded slow and kind. The forest continued to thaw, every sound a note in a larger harmony. And somewhere far beyond the castle, 2 rested under morning light, its mirrors perhaps quiet, their owner perhaps changed by the same silence that had healed the forest's heart. But here, in this small wooden house, nothing more was needed. The world had become whole in its own soft way, and the dawn, shining through the frosted glass, was no longer cold. It was warm with life's gentle promise that even after the longest winter, the light always returns. Snow White sat by the window, her reflection resting quietly beside the forests. Between them, there was no difference at all. Evening returned softly, almost unnoticed. The day had folded itself into a gentle hush, its light turning from gold to amber, then from amber to the pale silver of dusk. A fine mist rose from the forest floor, threading between the trees like breath. Everywhere, the quiet shimmered, not empty, but full, as though the world itself had settled into meditation. Snow White stood by the small stream near the cottage once more. The water moved lazily now, its current calm, mirroring the sky's pale reflection. She knelt and watched the ripples spread in circles, their edges trembling before dissolving back into smoothness. It reminded her of thought, how each one rises, moves and disappears into stillness again. She cupped her hands in the water and lifted it toward her face. Droplets slid down her skin, cool and clear, leaving behind trails that shimmered in the faint light. The forest's scent was deep earth and pine snow and air. When she looked down again, her reflection gazed up at her, framed by branches and clouds drifting across the mirrored surface. This time she did not look away, for in her reflection she saw not the fragile girl of yesterday, nor the image the world once measured. She saw light and shadow living together in quiet peace. She saw the patience of winter, the forgiveness of thaw, the stillness that had taught her how to see. The mirror no longer spoke of appearance. It spoke of being. A soft wind moved through the forest, carrying the faint rustle of the cottage door opening. She turned. The 7 gentle souls stood there in the doorway, their forms outlined by the fire's glow. They did not speak. They only smiled. In their faces, she saw again the virtues they had shared: kindness and patience, humility and peace. But now she understood that these were not separate beings at all. They were reflections of what had always lived within her. She walked toward them slowly, each step soundless on the damp earth. When she reached the clearing, the last light of day caught her hair and scattered through it, shining like faint gold dust. The world seemed to pause, as though listening. Kindness inclined his head slightly, his eyes soft with understanding. "Your reflection is clear now," he said. "Not because the mirror has changed, but because you have learned to see." Snow White smiled, her expression serene. "Then perhaps," she said, "the mirror was never showing me what I was. It was showing me what I was becoming." Peace nodded. "And what you already were," he said gently. They stood together for a time, saying nothing more. The firelight behind them flickered in the window, joining its glow with the stars now beginning to appear. One by one, the 7 turned and re-entered the cottage, their forms blending into warmth and lamplight, leaving the night to its silence. Snow White remained in the clearing. The forest around her shimmered faintly under moonlight. 1,000 mirrors made of dew water and eyes of sleeping creatures. Everywhere, reflection. Everywhere, stillness. She lifted her gaze to the sky. The moon hung low, pale and patient, its light folding over the forest like a blanket. She breathed deeply, feeling that same light within her chest, not as something borrowed, but as something remembered. For the first time, she understood that every mirror, whether of glass or water or eye or heart, had only ever pointed toward the same quiet truth, that what we seek to see has always been within. The air cooled further. A faint frost began to settle on the moss. She turned back toward the cottage, and through the window, she could see the mirror resting on the table where she had left it. It no longer reflected a single image. It had become luminous, as though holding all light and none. And she realized then that it no longer needed to show her anything. It had fulfilled its purpose. She stepped inside. The warmth embraced her, instantly filling the space between her breaths. The 7 candles still burned on the mantel, steady, untroubled. She walked past them to her small bed near the window and sat loosening her cloak. Outside, snow began to fall again, not heavy, not cold, but soft, like memory returning home. She lay down, the linen cool against her skin. The sound of the forest hummed faintly through the walls. Wind branches, the rhythm of life continuing. She turned her head toward the window. There, the moonlight touched the glass, creating another reflection. Her face calm and half lit, fading gently into the glow beyond. Her eyelids grew heavy, her breathing slowed. And as she drifted toward sleep, she thought of all the mirrors she had known, the bright, the broken, the hidden, the kind, and how each one had been a teacher whispering the same lesson in different ways. You are both the reflection and the light that makes it visible. The forest, hearing this final thought, seemed to sigh in agreement. Its breath passed through the open chimney, blending with the whisper of the fire. The world settled once more into luminous quiet. And as her last waking breath mingled with the night, her reflection in the window blurred and vanished into moonlight, not lost, not gone, but joined with everything she had come to understand. Because in the end, there is no mirror and no reflection, only the stillness that holds them both. Natha, the story is now complete. Sleep well, dream softly, and may the night hold you kindly.